Here we are, we've lined up in position, our tail wheel's locked, we've got our takeoff clearance, and we're ready to go. We've done one last look at the engine instruments, and we're in good shape. We're going to adjust the throttles to what we use in this airplane, 43.5 inches. On our takeoff roll, we've advanced the throttles to 43.5 inches. Co-pilot taps the top of the pilot's hand to stop to the movement at 43.5 inches because the pilot's eyes are concentrated outside the airplane to keep the airplane tracking down the center of the runway, correcting for wind drift, etc. In about the first, about 40 knots or so, the elevators are going to become effective, and the tail is going to start to become light, and will lift off of the tail wheel will lift off of the runway. At that point, maybe a little bit of forward pressure is appropriate on the control yoke, depending again on the weight that you've got in the back end. The light airplane, it'll pretty much come right up by itself. Airplane with a load in the back is going to require a little bit of assistance. So through about 40 knots or so, you feel the tail start to become active. A little bit of forward pressure, bring the airplane up to almost level position. What you're doing is streamlining it so that it will accelerate faster. By getting the tail up, there's less wind resistance, the airplane's going to accelerate faster. 85 knots, pilot's hands come off the throttles over to the control yoke, and smoothly but deliberately pulls back on the control yoke and lifts the aircraft off of the runway. Once a positive rate of climb has been established, pilot calls to the co-pilot, gear up. Pilot at this point has put his hands back over on the throttles. He's handling the throttles, he's flying the airplane with one hand, and the co-pilot reaches down and raises the landing gear. Not something that we can do here today, but the landing gear handle works just exactly like the flap handle, so we'll simulate this with the flap handle. Pilot reaches down, grabs hold of the landing gear handle, and calls, as the pilot has called gear up, the co-pilot deliberately pulls the handle to the up position. On the right-hand side of the cockpit, next to the co-pilot, are two very large gauges. One is your hydraulic system pressure gauge, and the forward gauge is your landing gear pressure gauge. These are very large gauges. They're actually gauges from an old steam boiler, furnace type situation. Typical hydraulic pressure in a DC-3 is around 800 pounds. So on takeoff, your landing gear pressure and your hydraulic system pressure would be basically equal at 800 pounds. When the co-pilot goes to retract the landing gear and he pulls the handle to the up position, that pressure that's keeping the landing gear in the down position needs to be brought down to zero to retract the landing gear. So as the landing gear begins retracting, the hydraulic pressure in the landing gear system on the pressure gauge keeps moving towards zero. Once the gauge comes to rest at zero and there's no more movement noted, you can be, under normal circumstances, assured that the landing gear has retracted into the wheel wells. There is no other indicator for the landing gear being up. It's merely that the system pressure has returned to zero.
What do the landing gear lights indicate?
We've got two landing gear lights, an up light, which is a red light, and a down light, which is a green light. And all that those lights do is indicate that the landing gear is either locked or unlocked in its down position. The landing gear could be down and not locked, and you'd still have a red light. Once the gear is lowered, we have a set of manual locks that there's a handle down on the floor to the left of the pilot's seat that puts the landing gear into the locked position. And even though the gear is down and the landing gear handle is returned to the neutral position, you still don't get a green down lock light until this handle is put into lock position. And again, I did not show you that in my takeoff sequence because I can't fool without any pressure on the landing gear system. I don't dare touch any of those handles for fear the landing gear might collapse. Okay, we've begun our takeoff sequence. We've pushed the throttles forward to 43.5 inches of manifold pressure. The co-pilot has checked the gauges on the takeoff. The pilot's eyes are outside. He is doing nothing at this point, been concentrating on tracking the airplane straight down the runway, correcting for wind drift, etc. Pilot has taken his hands off the throttles, moved them to the yoke, has smoothly rotated the airplane off the ground, and once he notes that he has established a positive rate of climb on the vertical speed indicator, he calls for gear up. The co-pilot unlocks the landing gear, moves the handle to the up position. The landing gear begins its retract sequence, which takes 30 to 45 seconds actually to complete. The airplane is accelerated through its best rate of climb speed, which is 95 knots. That's best rate of climb on a single engine, which is 95 knots, and continues towards 105 knots, which is our best rate of climb speed. At 105 knots, the airspeed indicator is, that's where you want it. You want to stop it there and pull the nose up to continue the climb. The throttles are brought from takeoff RPM, which is 2800 RPM in this airplane, to 2600 RPM, which is now you're set at METO power. And that is the maximum except takeoff. And the climb is continued maintaining METO power until you're at least 500 feet above the ground, at which point the throttles can be reduced to climb power, which in this airplane is 36 inches of manifold pressure and 2400 RPM. We bring about another inch of movement in the propeller controls. We're now set at 2400 RPM, 36 inches, and that's our climb power. We're 105 knots, and we continue the climb. All we've got to do, there's nothing else to do, just monitor the gauges and the airplane systems, continue the climb. As we climb, for every 1,000 feet, we're going to lose an inch of manifold pressure. So the pilot has to continually be bumping the throttles up to keep his manifold pressure at his climb setting so that the airplane continues to climb. And we'll do depending on gross weight, we'll do a pretty slow lumbering climb, again depending on gross weight and temperature, at anywhere between 500 to 1,000 feet a minute, 800 feet a minute being a little more typical for this airplane. Remember, we're flying pretty heavy with cargo aboard to go to our air shows. We've got a group of Mid-Atlantic Air Museum members in the back enjoying the trip, and we're fairly close to gross weights all the time, and we're flying in the eastern United States in the summertime, so temperatures can be anywhere from the 70s to the 90s, and the hotter it is, the slower we climb.
All right, this is good.